years. 4 years I have waited for this game. Since Dying Light 2 was announced on June 10th, 2018, I have finished college and spent nearly 3 years making games professionally. I have seen 4 films featuring Spider-Man and 2 Avengers films, which is what we as a society measure time in now, Marvel movies. I have lived through historic unrest, a worldwide pandemic, and Cyberpunk 2077, all to get to Dying Light 2. And it's finally here.
Now what do I have to wait for?
Still cannot believe I thought that shit was gonna come out in 2019. Today I'm gonna be talking about everything I love about the first game while relating it to what we've seen of the sequel, and trying to hypothesize what exactly we'll be doing in Dying Light 2 come 2019. Really ended up sounding like a fucking idiot there, didn't I? Today's the day, though. It is time for a full breakdown of Dying Light 2 from top to bottom, wherein I will discuss the highest highs and lowest lows of what is undeniably Techland's most ambitious project to date, and what has been my most anticipated game for the better part of 4 years. Now, if you don't have time to listen to the entirety of my bullshit opinion, in short,
the game is fun.
In long, well, I hope you have about 10,000 words worth of time on your hands, because we're about to get in-depth in this motherfucker. Without further ado, let's just get into this shit.
Parkour.
Parkour is the best part of Dying Light 2. Even if I kind of suck at it. The amount of times I died because I miscalculated a jump, or ran out of stamina, or whipped out the paraglider a second too late is frankly embarrassing. But it's also wonderful because it means the traversal is challenging and has depth. The first Dying Light parkour was a visceral and satisfying way to get across the map, but it was never really challenging because there wasn't a wide array of moves to learn. Sure, you had to use precision when engaging with the special parkour challenges, but overall most of what you were doing was plainly running, jumping, sliding, and climbing. This time around, the parkour system is exponentially more complex and engaging. You got the grappling hook, the paraglider, short jumps, normal jumps, long jumps, tall jumps, dashes, monkey bars, wall runs, other wall runs, sliding, active landing, weird-ass roof tubes, glitchy-ass hoverboards, witch brooms, you can fly, for God's sakes. Traveling through this game world is so dynamic, and I fucking love it. Just look at the amount of ways you can mantle over any given waist-high obstacle. Just check this out. Tap R1 to mantle over. Hold R1 to mantle and jump over, maintaining your momentum. Tap R1 just after the apex of the mantle to do a full normal jump off, losing your momentum but gaining height quicker. Quickly double tap R1 to do an extra high launch jump. Quickly tap L1 after R1 to do an extra long launch jump. We're looking at a minimum of 5 different ways to traverse over any given waist-high object in this game. And keep in mind, this is a world made exclusively of waist-high objects. But I guess like the normal world is too, so shouldn't be surprising. The synergy between the parkour system and the world design of Villedor is fucking staggering. Flabbergasting, even. I cannot fucking imagine the team collaboration, the mental fortitude, and the number of sheets of graph paper required to put together a city this meticulously measured to keep movement as smooth and seamless as it is. The gaps between the rooftops of Central Loop are perfectly measured to account for the player's dash move and launch jumps. The buildings in Old Villedor are precisely high enough to create tension when climbing, as they require pretty much the exact amount of stamina you begin with. Trampolines are individually tuned to launch you to the proper height of coordinated nearby ledges. It's just immaculate world design in every conceivable way. It's all so cleanly executed that after 10 or 20 hours with these systems, you start being able to instantly eyeball gap sizes and height ranges, and traversal transforms into this zen-like exercise of gliding through the world and combo chaining moves together as cleverly, efficiently, and faultlessly as possible. That whole process is made even easier due to the fact that you can basically climb anything, anywhere, at any time. If you look at a thing that logically seems like you could grab onto it, you can grab onto it. It was impressive the first time around, and it's even more impressive this time around. In the immortal words of a man with a child's haircut, it just works. There's no wrong approach here. Villedor is so generously constructed as to allow you to get almost anywhere you can see in countless different ways. Combine that freedom with the base satisfaction of this game's movement, and you have a system that's guaranteed to keep me coming back to this game for a long time. There just aren't a lot of games out there that make simply moving through the environment such a pleasure. Now, digging into the finer details of the parkour system, there are some things I'm a little iffy on. The whole system this time around is much more animation-driven, and that can occasionally make things feel sluggish. To clarify, when I say animation-driven, I just mean there are lengthier animations thrown into the parkour flow during which the player isn't fully in control of their movements, like when you jump through these wooden obstacles or slide through these weird-ass roof tubes. What were these for, by the way? Were these like fire escapes where people just chucking their children down these things? These animations I'm referring to are short, but they're ever present, and the trade-off happening here is you're losing a little bit of player agency and control in favor of more cinematic flair. This could end up being a bad thing if it starts to feel like you're being tossed around too often by extraneous animations, but the devs are clearly so finely tuned into what feels good that that doesn't end up being the case, and parkour just ends up looking 10 times more amazing while feeling 2 times more sticky than its predecessor. A worthy trade, if you ask me. The worst offender and best example of what I'm talking about here is DL2's slide move. You look at the slide from the first game, and it's basically like 3 frames of animation transferring into a static pose of Kyle Crane sliding along the ground. Maybe it doesn't look great, but your control over the slide isn't limited by any clunky, luxurious animation a la The Last of Us 2 or Red Dead 2. The second Dying Light slide move is a whole-ass restrictive animation that locks you into this rigid wind-up and cooldown. You always kick yourself up with this exact same animation regardless of your speed and momentum, and it ends up feeling like you have less control during this move as compared to its DL1 counterpart. The same can be said for a lot of the moves in DL2, but again, it's well done, it's a new choice that works out in the end. Who cares? Parkour's great. An aspect of parkour that isn't so great, however, is the new stamina bar that's been added when climbing or executing specific parkour moves. It's not a terrible addition, as it pretty much becomes irrelevant after you've stabbed yourself with a couple upgrade needles by hour 10, but it just feels unnecessary. All it really does is serve as a way to block you from completing specific content and preventing you from becoming too OP too quickly regarding your special parkour combat moves, and that's... I don't know, it's just there. The stamina bar doesn't feel like a step forward for the parkour system, more like a lateral move that simply distinguishes the way parkour works in this game from the way it worked in the last game. Not good, not really bad, just there to help balance out the player's progression. Hard to get too mad about. I'd also be remiss if I didn't touch on the floatiness of the jumps that everybody was talking about pre-release, and my opinion on this is pretty simple. It's fine. Coming from the first game into the sequel, it's definitely weird how much hang time Aiden gets when jumping, but it's clearly calibrated that way to make the system as a whole more accessible and palatable. This newfound hang present during longer jumps does a good job giving the player a bit more time in the air to make split-second decisions, which is appreciated as the parkour system is much more in-depth this time around and requires a bit more critical thinking and faster reaction times during gameplay. I have seen some mods post-launch that make jumping snappier, closer to the first game, and I'd fucking love to see something like that as an actual option if you're playing on hard or nightmare mode, which hasn't even been added yet. But on the whole, I got used to Aiden's iconic moon boots 5 or 6 hours into the game and haven't thought about it since. Where this floatiness originates from is an interesting topic of discussion, though. It has to do with the first mandatory upgrade in the parkour tree, high jump. This ability marks a surprising change to the way jumping fundamentally works from Dying Light 1 to Dying Light 2. In the first game, you tap the button and you jumped, and that jump would always be the same height. In DL2, with high jump, if you hold the jump button down, you will gain more height and stay airborne longer. Oh, and you can also run and jump diagonally more smoothly now. It was something you could do in DL1, but it was never really emphasized or utilized the way it is in Stay Human. These subtle shifts give the player so much more control over precisely where their character is going, and in an environment as tightly and cleverly constructed as Villador, that seemingly small tweak becomes massively important. Like these monkey bars right here. If I wanted to jump down and swing to a lower level, I'd tap the jump button, but if I wanted to stay on my current level, I'd hold the jump button. The world of Stay Human is filled with thousands of micro decisions like this when you're running around, and it helps keep the parkour endlessly entertaining. One last thing before we move on to combat, I can't gloss over these new Night Runner tools, the paraglider and the grappling hook. I was certainly excited to use these tools going in, but I had no idea just how much they change the game in terms of traversal. These two items are what help DL2's parkour notably set itself apart from the originals and elevate it into something entirely new. You can fucking fly now! They took the fucking Paiza suit from the first game, a goddamn Easter egg hidden in a Mario level, and they turned it into an essential traversal tool. And what a wonderfully bold decision that was. The paraglider is a fucking literal lifesaver when you're traversing Central Loop. Can you imagine how much more annoying it would be navigating this map if you couldn't save yourself from accidentally busting ass off these skyscrapers? The way it's integrated into the environment too, with these air vents that launch you up, another shining example of how Villador is perfectly constructed to be the ultimate parkour playground. I feel like I'm on fucking recess every time I wander around this city. The grappling hook as well, another incredible addition. It seems like these things are the new hot game mechanic right now. Fucking 3 games with grappling hooks came out within a month of each other just now. But I digress. DL2's grappling hook is less necessary than the paraglider, as evidenced by how far into the game you receive it, but once you get your hands on it, it's hard to imagine traversing the Central Loop without it by your side. It transforms Dying Light 2 from a David Bell simulator into a first-person Spider-Man simulator, and if that statement combined with the gameplay I'm showing right now doesn't sell you on this game's movement, fucking nothing will. Using this tool just feels and looks so good. In first person at least. In third person, it's a fucking disaster. I've spent the past few minutes laying out the complexities of this game's parkour system, and it is complex, but the last thing I want to say before we move on is that the best thing about this shit is that it's not too complex. There are just enough moves and tools to keep things dynamic without it becoming overly intricate. It's the very definition of easy to learn, hard to master. I'm kinda worried next time around with DL3 it might start to reach the same critical mass that Arkham Knight's combat did, where it became too complicated for its own good, just stopped being fun, but as of now, we are at the perfect happy medium. Stay Human's parkour is a natural and layered evolution of the first game's systems that manages to be challenging without becoming buried in its own butthole. On to the next!
Combat.
Combat was not Dying Light's specialty. Combat isn't exactly Dying Light 2's specialty either, but it is markedly improved this time around. At the very least, fighting humans doesn't make me want to turn my fucking console off. As you might expect if you've played the first game, combat here is appropriately crunchy and satisfying. The hit reactions are fucking excellent, as is the gore, definitely some of the most satisfying decapitations in gaming. The way the weapons swing through an enemy as opposed to bouncing off an enemy like they tended to in the first game is a bit disappointing as it makes weapon impacts feel a bit less hardy, but it's not a deal breaker, just a different stylistic choice. The ragdoll this time around has definitely gotten more exaggerated in order to help sell Aiden's enhanced strength, with finishing blows sending people spiraling into the distance like human home runs, and it is very entertaining, albeit a bit much sometimes. Kinda would prefer if this hilarious shit only happened when you finished off somebody with a charge attack as opposed to any normal attack, so combat against low-level enemies doesn't end up looking like a fucking Looney Tunes cartoon, but fuck it, who cares? So, in terms of actually engaging with this game's combat, this time around the player is equipped with a much wider variety of offensive and defensive options, and, as you might assume, that greatly benefits the whole combat experience. By the time you reach the end game, you have at your disposal blocking, parrying, normal attacks, charge attacks, spin attacks, normal kicks, drop kicks, leap kicks, 3 different types of falling attacks, and a suite of gadgets such as throwing knives, infected throwing knives, fuck yeah, grenades, molotovs, mines, disposable shotguns, and that ain't even all of it. There's still more fucking shit I could list off, and all of it is fun and useful. Oh my god, and you even have these like temporary weapons occasionally lying around the environment as well. I was bolted after a bolter one time and he was just getting away, but I saw a spear on the ground and I picked it up, I chucked it at that motherfucker, and it just made my whole goddamn day. In one of the earliest previews of this game, Aiden is shown grabbing a fuck it bucket and sending it flying towards a bandit's head, and while the temporary weapon interactivity didn't end up being that expansive, there are some bottles and bricks lying around that can stun an enemy if you manage to find them. So yeah, combat this time around is very expansive. You have a lot of cool tools at your disposal. Only problem is, all the enemies have at their disposal is this, this, and this.
Come at me!
Throwing rocks? That's all you motherfuckers got? There's a couple extra moves. Every once in a while you'll come across an annoying dude who spits AoE fire. I found one single move in the game where jumping is a viable dodge, but in general, the enemy movesets are very limited. And even though these enemies can't do shit, most of them have that same confidence, that same deeply ingrained mental disconnect that, like, Batman thugs have. You just watched this fully armored tank of a motherfucker snap 50 shins like wishbones, but you're gonna be the one to take him down. Okay, yeah, have at it. Fucking go for it. How flat-headed do you have to, how much of your brain must have been sheared off to think that you could take this man? He just drop-kicked someone into the sun! Why would you ever fuck with a man who just sprints up to beehives and just stuffs bees in his pockets? This motherfucker is obviously a madman. But yeah, man, the hand-to-hand combat variety in Dying Light 2 is better than the first, but it still ain't all there. At least the soldiers with guns in the first game managed to vary things up in the back half. Once you've seen your first heavy dude and GRE anomaly about 4 hours into the game, you've basically seen everything of note in terms of legitimate opponents. You are just so much more dynamic than the enemies, and overall I don't think that's too bad a thing, because at least your moveset is entertaining, and you can easily craft your own fun, attempting crazy combos and being the zombie-killing Batman you were born to be, but I would really appreciate something a bit more depthful on the enemy side in the future. As of now, the game mostly overwhelms you with numbers, and that begins to feel repetitive and unfair pretty quickly. Your combat is only as good as your enemies, which is something the Souls games illustrate beautifully with their readable tells and broad movesets that require the player to make the most of their given skill set. Sifu, another recent example, the enemies there are so carefully crafted, just like the city of Villador. Yes, I know, weird way to end that last sentence, but the point I'm trying to make here is that there are two pillars of gameplay with Dying Light 2, parkour and combat. The, quote, enemy of the parkour side of things is the environment, the city of Villador, and there isn't a single human opponent that can serve as an equivalence on the combat side of things, in terms of complexity and entertainment factor. No, not even that 4-phase final boss, which, by the way, was terrible, glitched out completely, it did not work at all. Okay, wait, let's talk about that shit for a second. I'm sorry, spoilers, I know, you're just gonna need to clear out for a second, just skip to this time code, I'm just gonna start talking about this shit real quick. 3, 2, 1. Alright, they're gone. What the fuck was that? I completely understand what they were going for here, and as you might have guessed based on everything I've said so far, I really do like the idea of a one-on-one final boss that fully utilizes this game's in-depth combat system, but this shit was bad. This whole part of the game was sketchy as hell the last 3 hours or so, but we'll talk about that more during the story segment. The final fight, though, this could have potentially been something really special if Waltz's moveset and animations were a bit more refined, if the AI and scripting work wasn't so buggy, if the arena was better suited to each individual phase, if they didn't blind you and set a timer on your ass every time you try to do anything in the second phase, yada yada yada, the list goes on and on and on. This shit was rough for many reasons, but again, better luck next time. I really do appreciate the idea and the attempt. With that in mind, I do think it was better than Rice's laughable QTE ending. That shit was nonsense. Shifting away from spoilers and back into the combat discussion though, let's talk weapons. I love the weapon variety in Dying Light 2. The various homemade designs are extremely distinct and just plain fun to look at. You can hit somebody with a table leg, you can hit somebody with a guitar neck, you can hit somebody with a knife attached to another knife. Which seems inconvenient if I'm being honest. The first game had a great variety of weapons as well, but they were mostly grounded, real-world implements. Not a lot of standout stuff in there. And while I would like to see some weapons of that style make a return in DLC, just for the sake of more variety, I really do enjoy DL2's unique take on hand-fashioned, post-apocalyptic armaments. Shit is just styling, and that style feeds into the weapon durability loop by making me excited to switch to something new and see what's next. On that note of durability though, I do find it weird how durability and mods are handled this time around. Don't think I'm too big a fan of it. In the first game, shit was simple. Weapons had a limited durability with a limited number of repairs, and those repairs could be executed at any time by holding triangle. You added mods to weapons in your inventory's blueprint tab and picked up new blueprints by exploring the world and finding them in the wild inside of the strange boxes that strange hoarders must have left them in before the world ended. This time around, blueprints are relegated to vendors and must be purchased instead of found, which right off the bat is lame because blueprints served as some of the most exciting loot in the first game. It was always great to discover a blueprint and immediately attach it to whatever you could, just to see what kind of dumbass shit would get stuck on your weapon this time, and that simple pleasure of modding weapons is still there, but it's made less exciting by just buying the things and also having to upgrade them 9 fucking times before they're even half useful. 9 upgrades for each and every mod, ability, and consumable? Seriously, guys? You got it right with the Night Runner tools. You only upgrade those things 3 times, and each time you do, something about the tool changes, so it's actually worthwhile, as opposed to all this other bullshit that just feels like an unrewarding and deeply unnecessary grind. Weapon modding also doubles as weapon repairing this time around. Every time you add a mod to a weapon, it repairs the weapon slightly, which is just fucking strange. I don't get how duct taping a lighter to my table leg contributes to its structural integrity. Plus, as a player, this repair system makes me want to hold off on modding any of my weapons until they've already been damaged, as to not waste any repairs. I actively do not want to mod weapons when I acquire them due to this off-putting addition of tying mods to durability. Also, and I know I'm probably going to get some shit for this, but I don't think weapons break fast enough in this game. I assume the overall increased durability of weapons has to do with the way they've set up the system that we just discussed, but I think maybe 4 weapons of mine actually broke over the course of my 60-hour playthrough, and that just doesn't feel like enough. It feels like a half measure to appease players who complained about weapons breaking all the time in the first game, but like, if you're going to go out of your way to adjust the system to make those people happy, then why not just remove durability entirely? As it stands, it takes about 1,000,000 years for any significant weapon to break, to the point where I almost forgot that they could break. I'm not asking for Breath of the Wild durability here. We all know that'd make everybody's fucking heads explode, but an option to make weapon durability generally less forgiving, like it was in DL1, would be a great optional setting for masochistic bastards such as myself. All of my weapons just ended up taking up space in my inventory and eventually getting sold off instead of breaking, because of how quickly their damage numbers became irrelevant, which contributed to me becoming the Elon Musk of the apocalypse like 1/3 of the way through the game. In summation, the player's moveset is great, the enemy's movesets are bad, the final boss fight was bad, the weapon variety and art design is top tier, durability and mods are worse.
Story and decisions.
Welcome to paradise.
Dying Light 2's story is a lot of things. It's creative, it's ambitious, it's sprawling, it's confusing, it's tropey, and it's ultimately disappointing. This story made me feel a lot of things. First off, I want to start out by saying that I appreciate the attempt here. The first Dying Light story was basically a direct DVD action movie, complete with cheesy melodrama and a cliche knockoff villain. God, I still can't get over how much rice is just Voss light. And now we got Diet Wesker to pair with that, that's cool. The first game was an assortment of action movie and zombie movie tropes, and it wasn't much more than that. I'd probably rate it a 5 out of 10. Perfectly average. I only laughed at it a couple times. This second game strives for so much more than that, though. Whether they achieved it is up for debate, but here they've established a unique universe with an aesthetic all its own, backed up with tons of lore and a collection of surprisingly colorful characters. These characters, the people of Villador, are the real heart of this story. Which is why it pains me to say that a good portion of them really suck. You have a few compelling and well-acted characters in the mix, like Hakon, Ro, Frank, and kinda Lawan, but those bright spots are snuffed out by the unbearable presence of characters like Barney, Sophie, Alberto, Waltz, and kinda Lawan.
Fuck you. Fuck you.
Fuck you, Aiden.
What's worse is that a majority of the bad characters I just mentioned are from the first third of the game, and it makes for a very bad first impression of Villador and its inhabitants. Everyone is smarmy and angry, and I understand that makes sense for this world, but it quickly becomes abrasive and one note.
Fuck you.
I think the worst part of this story is also the thing that holds its characters and their relationships together. The dialogue.
The city's got a lot of trash, and I'm the maid who's gonna make it the capital of cleanliness.
What the fuck? What? There's so much talking in this game, and so little of it feels like it's coming from a writer with a strong voice. The prose is sorely lacking in texture or personality, except for when they're trying too hard and it gets annoying. Looking at you, Alberto! Looking at you, Alberto! People tend to just dump exposition and bluntly tell you what's happening and their feelings on the matter.
Spent so much time wanting to kill him. But maybe, maybe I never did because I never really wanted to. Maybe all I ever wanted was to stop hurting.
It very much ends up feeling like clunky Bethesda writing.
If you're here to talk me into working on Liberty Prime, you can forget it.
2 seconds later.
Do I need to remind you why you made that promise in the first place?
No, that won't be necessary. Tell Proctor Ingram to get her scribes ready. It's going to take a hell of a lot of work to get Liberty Prime back online, but we'll get it done.
For instance, let me show you a clip of one of the early side quests I found. Said side quest involves a peacekeeper wanting to escape the city with his girlfriend, but when you track her down, it turns out that girlfriend has a girlfriend and is using the peacekeeper as her ticket out. This whole thing leads to a confrontation between the BF and GF, and this is how it went.
Please, don't leave without me. Let me go with you, the 3 of us.
Liz won't agree.
So, convince her. Aiden, come on. Say something, please. You've been outside. You know how things are beyond the walls.
You won't make it outside the city anyway. 2, 3 people, doesn't matter. You don't know what you're walking into.
We could stay here, Chloe. You've got water now, right?
So the fuck what? I want to leave.
So, how will you get past the PK?
We'll think of something.
And how will you survive without UV lamps?
You're right. This whole plan was stupid from the start.
So, you're saying you'll stay?
I'll stay.
Fucking seriously? I need to leave the city. You shouldn't do that. You're right, I never thought of it that way. A large portion of the dialogue ends up sounding like this, and maybe it has something to do with translating from Polish, I don't know, but it often results in whatever narrative the game's trying to tell at any given moment feeling stilted. And this is all without even bringing up the voice acting, something that, again, ranges from quite good to quite bad. You got characters like Hakon, who are a little exaggerated, but still get the emotion across, and then 5 seconds later you're listening to Driscoll's Irish accent.
It's not often I see an unfamiliar face. Pilgrims are just pure play.
Get the fuck out of here. I'm having flashbacks to Justin Theroux and Charlie's Angels.
I'm gonna teach you and your friends about PM. I'm gonna kill them. Just so you can hear them scream.
Oh, he was so good in The Leftovers. I know this man can act. Why did you make him do an Irish accent? Most of the side characters have an exaggerated accent like that. In Villador, you'll find weirdos from Russia, France, England, Ireland, Boston, New York, Africa. Shit is the most diverse apocalypse I've seen in my life. And while I do enjoy that subtle diversity as an element of this particular post-apocalypse, it also results in some pretty fucking wacky accents.
A demolisher considerably larger than others of its ilk has been sighted in the park.
That being said, there are some solid performances nestled in this narrative, alongside the absolute suite of overly hammy or unintentionally hilarious ones. Jonathan Forbes is charming and charismatic as Hakon. Stuart Scudamore showed great range and growth as Frank. Glenn Raig killed it as the casual and lovable yet dedicated Sergeant Rowe, and Elroy Powell's bassy pipes won me over on Jack Matt. Even though the character himself is a bit forgettable, he's bolstered by a memorable performance.
The next time you speak to me like that in front of my soldiers, I'll take my knife and cut your fucking cock off!
Rosario Dawson is okay as Lawan, but I found her character to be a bit of a flatline. Just another Jade Aldemir, I am strong woman because I am stern, but also have a sensitive side, and I love you, male protagonist, do not leave me, sort of thing. We all know Rosario Dawson is a huge talent, but the character feels phoned in, so her performance ends up feeling phoned in. And then there's Aiden. Oh, Aiden. Aiden Babaden.
Aiden Babaden.
Stop.
Aiden, come on! Aiden Babaden!
Stop saying that. Oh my god, if you say that shit one more time, I'm about to slap a child like the Dragon of Dojima. Or his friend, or his enemy. There's a lot of women slapping in those games. This guy is... Okay, well, to start, I simply have to mention how this man always sounds like he's about to bust a nut.
I'm so close, Luan.
I'm coming for you.
Hang on, Veronica. I'm coming.
I'm sorry, I know this is like my sex pervert brain flaring up in public, but this man straight up sounds like he is edging his way through his dialogue. He's always got this quiver to his voice, and he's at this lower sensual register like he's doing erotic ASMR. It gets genuinely uncomfortable if you're wearing headphones.
It's a tight fit in here.
Oh my god, put your dick away, Aiden Babaden. So Aiden Caldwell is the protagonist of Dying Light 2, and of all the video game protagonists in recent memory, he is one of them. Before we get too deep into the Aiden discussion though, let me tell you what I was hoping would happen with this game's protagonists, back when everything was hopes and dreams and theories after the 2018 announcement. Put simply, I think the player just should have been a pilgrim with no backstory who came to the city, maybe to deliver a specific piece of mail or contraband, and suddenly gets swept up in the goings-on of Villador. Bam, that's it. This whole I have to find my flashback MacGuffin relative trope is so tired, it's been done a million times, and this kind of plot almost always fails to connect me with the plight of the protagonist because I don't know this girl. Just like I didn't know Shawn, or Mia, or Lynn, or Liam Neeson. I really do think the protagonist of this game should have been a player-shaped whole, as the devs over at Obsidian put it. Someone like the Courier in Noviex, a lightly customizable character with the gender of your choosing that allows you to step into the protagonist and live in the world through them. But instead we got Aiden Caldwell, who she sure exists in this universe. He sure is a guy. Truly, I did not think it was possible to construct a character more milquetoast than Kyle Mayonnaise Crane, but Aiden makes him look like fucking Michael Corleone by comparison. Aiden is just barely a character. He's straddling the line between a defined character and a self-insert character, and by straddling that line, he manages to fill neither of those roles in any sort of satisfactory way. The only character I've seen genuinely get away with writing that line is Geralt of Rivia, and Aiden is no Geralt of Rivia. I really do hope Techland decides to go full New Vegas next time around, in a multitude of ways, but starting with giving us a character we can craft ourselves. A customizable player-shaped hull like the Courier, so we can live in a world that reacts to us, instead of just playing as another one of these dying light protagonists. God damn. Please do not do that to me again. I absolutely realize that talented people put time and effort and love into this character, and I really do appreciate that work, but Aiden just doesn't work. Even outside of the varying dialogue choices where you can decide his demeanor, he is inconsistent. He's charismatic but shy. He's social but he keeps to himself. He's hard-edged but he's also a soft boy. He is every character and he is no character. And I'm not saying that fictional people can't have conflicting traits like that. I'm just saying his characterization comes off as confused, muddled, and poorly directed. And that's just in the grand scheme of things from scene to scene, but even line to line there's inconsistency. You can just tell that these takes were done on different days, at different energy levels, and it becomes kind of distracting. Like, here's an example. One second he's engaging in jovial banter with Hakon, and the next he sounds like he's about to beat the living fuck out of the guy, for no discernible reason.
You know how to open locks?
Sure. Turn the key.
What if you don't have a key?
Hakon, I've traveled thousands of kilometers. You think doors are a problem for me?
Oh, you didn't lie. You know your stuff.
I had no other choice. Was forced to know my stuff.
This inconsistency is ironically so consistent that being ill-defined becomes Aiden's defining trait, and nothing can save him from that looseness. Not even the okay performance being given by Jonah Scott. I can tell the man is really trying and giving the performance his all, but like I said, I don't even think a knockout performance could unfumble this bag. I mean, Kyle Crane was held up by Roger Craig Smith's performance, but come on, Roger Craig Smith is Roger Craig Smith. Jonah himself is on YouTube, and he seems like a really nice guy. I recommend checking out his channel. He's very sweet, so I really do not want to offend, but honestly, this character did nothing for me, and I don't think I'm in the minority on that. Like I harped on a second ago, I really hope Techland goes a different way with its next lead character, because they are 2 for 2 on these cliche fucking gritty video game white dudes. Just add them to the fucking flaming pile we got going. Speaking of Aiden though, let's talk about his part of the story and where it leads, which is the epilogue. The personal storyline of Aiden looking for his non-character MacGuffin sister carries him through Villador and climaxes in the last 2 or 3 hours of the game, which is one long mission dubbed the epilogue. Really fucking strangely, this epilogue includes the same mission that was shown in the 2019 demo with the Renegades and the Colonel, and like, does anybody find that fucking weird? My first thought upon getting to this mission and realizing that it was the ending was, wow, is this game actually finished? Because it kind of doesn't feel finished. Of course, I realized that there were 3 years of delays between now and then. Innumerable changes surely occurred during that time, but it just strikes me as odd that the devs would show off the ending of their game 3 years before release. The beginning of this epilogue feels like the 2/3 mark of the story, and everything past it feels like a massively truncated version of what could have been the game's entire third act. Maybe this weirdness has to do with Techland scrapping and rewriting a bunch of Chris Avalon's material after he was fired mid-2020, but I would rather not open that can of worms. We're just trying to have fun here today. Either way, what this all builds up to is an ending that completely shits the bed. There's a whole new threat of missiles attacking the city that, granted, was implied from the beginning, but even then it feels out of left field, and I still have absolutely no fucking idea why Waltz needed to shoot missiles at the city in order to save Mia. I have no fucking idea how those two things are linked. That bit of info was so poorly communicated that it makes Waltz's entire plan look like incomprehensible nonsense on par with Lex Luthor of BBS fame. The final decision is the real victim of that lack of clarity. You're given one last choice at the tail end of the epilogue, and quite honestly, I had no idea what either choice really meant. I didn't know if Luan was gonna die if I went to her, if I could save her from the giant bomb she was trying to do something with. The whole last setup was so incompetently established that I just picked Mia because Aiden had been searching for her. Maybe that would result in an alright ending. I had no fucking idea. That's a recurring problem with a lot of the weightier choices you're given. There were several key moments where I did not understand the stakes or consequences of the options I was presented. And that's just clunky narrative design, straight up. That topic is also a great segue into the gameplay side of Dying Light 2's story, the decision making. This feature was pitched as the big selling point of this sequel, the big new innovation they were trying to push, and like the rest of the game, it has its pros and cons. Unlike the parkour and combat systems though, it's mostly cons here. There are a handful of decisions that felt like they had a legit impact, about 5 to be exact, and there was one cutscene near the end that felt like a powerful culmination of the sides I'd chosen throughout the storyline, but getting there involved trudging my way through dozens of railroaded conversation sequences where the only, quote, dialogue choices were give me more details, and please continue, I'll do anything you say. There were so many moments where somebody asked me to do a job, and I assumed I'd be given the choice whether to team up with them or not. But sadly, the only options presented to me were, I'll work with you, and I don't want to, but I'll work with you. After you realize what Techland is doing here, the decision-making quickly begins to feel transparent and meaningless. It starts to feel like these dialogue options are more often than not a fake front being put up by the game in an attempt to seem like a choice-based RPG, when in reality, nothing really matters. And do you remember that big demo shown off in 2019, where you get to make a call that could possibly end up revealing a huge new portion of the map? Well, that is the one time in the game where you get to make a decision of that magnitude. And in retrospect, it feels like that's only there so they didn't have to cut a portion of the game they already showed off to the public. It's really sad, too, because you can see the seed of a solid system in here. The basic idea of adding a decision-making system to this world that makes everything more alive and reactive is a very good one. But it's clear to me that Techland was not ready to create a game that legitimately lived up to these promises. They did not know what they were getting into here, and it fucking shows. It feels like a test run for the next game more than anything. I really hope they can nail this pillar of gameplay next time around now that they have the experience of DL2 and a better understanding of what something like this requires. Oh, and this is sort of nitpicky, but please change the HUD element that governs decision-making, this little circle right here. The way this is set up is very reminiscent of Horizon, and instead of making you feel like you have any agency during these conversations like the Fallout UI does, it makes you feel like you're being led through a set conversation with very limited options. It feels less like you're engaging in a believable back and forth with a human, and more like you're choosing how long you want your cutscene to be. It's very surface level and simplistic, especially when you keep in mind the geyser of PR bullshit the marketing team was spewing up to launch. Simply put, and this is gonna sound harsh as fuck, so I'm sorry in advance, but the decision making here is worst in class. I really love the idea of this new edition, and I hope Techland tries their hand at it a second time so they can hit the nail on the head, but it's gonna take a lot of work and a lot of changes to the current system to get there.
Progression.
When I made my first video about Dying Light, coming up on 4 years ago, one of the main points I focused on was how satisfying the progression was, and that mostly had to do with that game's upgrade trees, so let's see how DL2's upgrade trees stack up in comparison. Basically, they're great. They are exactly what every upgrade tree should be, meaningful. I don't mean to make bullshit comparisons, but I started playing Forbidden West the other day and I immediately noticed 6 fucking skill trees. 162 skills total. And before you got to any of the interesting ones, it was like passive boost, passive boost, passive boost, passive boost. And this is not that at all. Dying Light 2 skill trees are tight as fuck.
It's a tight fit in here.
And that's the type of design I like. No fat on these upgrade trees whatsoever. Every single skill changes up the dynamics of gameplay. Around 60% of these unlocks are full-on new executable moves. The difference between combat and traversal at the beginning of the game compared to the end is palpable, which is great to see because the first game had that shit on lock too. Very happy to see that trend continue. After years of enduring pointlessly dragged out upgrade trees in Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Horizon, and the like, it's so refreshing to play a game that doesn't bullshit around with your upgrades and pushes to make each and every one of them exciting and significant. That's not to say every individual upgrade is flawless though. There are a couple that add these flashing, blinking indicators whenever you do some basic shit like climb a ledge and oh wait, they patched it, never mind. While you're at it, Techland, please let me turn off these other indicators. Please give me more HUD options in general. I want to turn off that GTA ass chase meter. I want to turn off these parkour and combat counters in the corner. God, this HUD is fucking disgusting! RPG elements are another new aspect of Dying Light 2's progression, and maybe this is a hot take, but I think Techland's playing with fire here. They added armor slots this time around. They added upgradable items and consumables, levels that you gain throughout the story, and this is all standard RPG stuff, but the problem is, I don't want Dying Light to be an RPG series. The dialogue choices and the branching decision making, that shit's cool. That has the potential to be very compelling if done right. But this boring shit, they gotta be very careful when throwing this kind of stuff into the mix, because if it becomes any more prevalent in Dying Light 3, I strongly feel that it'll start bogging down the whole experience. I mean, it already has, for me. I do not engage with Dying Light to spend 10 minutes in a menu balancing intangible stats for armor that I will never see because I'm playing a first-person only video game. And yes, I understand there's co-op and other players can see your armor there, but A, I don't play co-op, and B, if the first and foremost goal of these systems is to allow you to have an aesthetically pleasing character model, that same goal was accomplished with a much simpler system in Dying Light 1. That system being those funny little outfits they gave you. There were no stats attached to these, no pros or cons to weigh, no utterly pointless class archetypes. It was just like, hey, you want to dress up like a ninja? How about a spy? Now go out there and kill some more zombies, you crazy kid. Balancing armor stats, being subtly prevented from exploring areas because you're under-leveled, these are RPG elements that actively detract from the core Dying Light experience by pulling you away from the parkour and the combat and the decision making. This is a bad thing. If I could take the armor slots, level gating, and upgradable items and consumables out of the game, I'd do that shit in a fucking heartbeat, because I strongly believe that Dying Light should be an action game first and RPG way second. Luckily, that balance still does check out for the most part with Stay Human, as the RPG elements are certainly secondary and can be ignored for the most part if you're like me and would prefer not to engage with that type of stuff. I changed armor maybe 15 times in my 60-hour playthrough, which I very much appreciate, but it also makes you wonder, like, why the fuck is this stuff even here? What does this add? What was the design intention? It seems to me the intent was to deepen and expand the systems at the player's disposal, but it feels like in attempting to do so, things have become needlessly complicated in a way that makes everything worse instead of better. For example, items. Let's look at the medkits in both games. In Dying Light 1, a medkit is a medkit. You use it, and it will restore 100 health. Simple. In Dying Light 2, however, medkits, along with every other consumable and throwable and booster, must be constantly upgraded in order to keep up with the player's ever-increasing levels. A level 1 medkit will do absolutely jack and shit for you past 10 hours into the game, and in order to have a craftable health item that feels appropriate for your late-game health bar, you will need to upgrade the medkits 9 times. Every single item in Dying Light 2 must be upgraded 9 fucking times! I already pointed this out earlier, but I just want to re-emphasize the point. That is absurd. That is a complete waste of my time, and I refuse to indulge it. If items had shorter and more rewarding upgrade paths with 2 or 3 levels, I'd be much more okay with it, but the current setup is just pointlessly excessive in a way that, again, takes away from the overall experience more than it adds. In one fan's kinda humble opinion, I strongly believe these particular RPG elements, like armor stats, classes, levels, and extensively upgradable items should be minimized, or streamlined, or outright removed in this franchise's next entry, because they're just not worth it. These features only serve to dilute what was previously a much more visceral, action-based experience by piling on hours of tedious menu management and loot grinding. Dying Light 1's progression was better, as it was simpler, more rewarding, and didn't waste my goddamn precious time on this earth. Don't make DL3 a hardcore RPG. It was as depthful as it needs to be. Side note, depthful, which I have used a couple times in this video now, is apparently not a word. I spent like 20 minutes looking into this shit, or really thought depthful was a word. Look, even my fucking autocorrect is flagging that shit now. Lame. I'm gonna keep using it. Something that wasn't very depthful in the first game in a way that I appreciated was looting. And that's remained relatively the same this time around, and I just wanted to appreciate this game's looting real quick before moving on to the next bit. I love all the interactive containers you can check. I love that you can still pop the trunks of certain cars if you're paying attention. Looting in this series is simple and satisfying, and I'm so glad that they kept this hilarious tippy-tapping animation. It looks like a cat making little biscuits. It's adorable. Elden Ring does looting in a similar way, and I'm sorry I'm bringing that shit up so much, but it is like the best game I've played in the longest time, and it just came out. It allows you to just grab shit and move on, in contrast to other RPGs where you have to sift through every little item that every single motherfucker's got in their pockets. The looting is good. The upgrade trees are very good. This other shit is very bad.
The open world.
Good day, Philidor.
This city is quite an achievement. Stunningly gorgeous, perfectly laid out for parkour and combat, stuffed with content, and replete with fascinating details and Easter eggs, Villador is one of the most striking open worlds I've seen in a hot minute. It ain't perfect, but it ain't half bad either. What I was initially taken aback by was how unexpectedly cozy this world felt. Lush greens constantly dominate the screen, backed up by these warm reds and yellows, and it feels like a massage for the eyes. Villador is a whole-ass vibe, in contrast to Haran's muted palette and oppressively apocalyptic feel. Villador is much more alive than Haran, which is something I go back and forth on whether I like or not. You regularly see NPCs lounging atop buildings during the day, which took me a minute to get used to. I accidentally kicked the fuck out of a lot of innocent people thinking they were zombies. Oh.
What the hell was that?
I'm sorry. It feels like we've gone from mid-apocalypse to post-apocalypse. We leapfrogged over the post-apocalypse, the really harsh times that were portrayed in much of the misleading pre-release material, and we've landed in the era after the post-apocalypse, when people have basically already rebuilt and civilization is fairly livable, at least in this specific city. I know there are still some issues as presented in the story and side quests, but people also just hang out during the day, wandering freely without a care in the world, and when the sun goes down, they retreat to their entirely safe homes, which are all over the map by the end of the campaign. There's no genuine sense of danger to this world like there was in Haran. It's a complete tonal shift away from what I enjoyed about the first game's atmosphere. Exploring Haran was a very isolating ordeal. It made you feel like you were the last man on Earth in a way that I really loved, and DL2 doesn't seem interested in replicating that. I really do appreciate Techland committing to an entirely new direction with Villador. They had a fucking idea and they stuck to it, but it's also sad to see the tone of the previous entry's world fall by the wayside. This feels much more like a lively fantasy game than a grim post-apocalypse game, closer to Skyrim than Dead Island. Personally, I would prefer quite a bit more Dead Island sprinkled back into the equation down the line. Maybe give me one chunk of the map in the next game with no living humans so I can get my classic Dying Light kick somewhere. This newfound fantasy feel of Villador is backed up by the game's unique aesthetic of the modern Dark Ages, as the devs themselves have put it. This aesthetic is highlighted all over the place, from the historical architecture of the city to the dense foliage that makes half of Villador feel like a raised forest to the distinctly medieval design of some of the characters' clothing. I really like how the biters look. The artist managed to achieve sort of a medieval peasant vibe with modern clothing by decaying it and layering it in creative ways. The shawls that rest over the faces of some of the biters feel particularly out of time. It's cool. I'll be interested to see if Techland continues to refine this modern Dark Ages flair moving forward, because I think they've crafted something special that can visually set the series apart from anything else on the market, whether I like it or not. It's an idiosyncratic look that reminds me most of Fallout in the way of being so unique that nobody else can rip it off. Techland has created and cornered the modern Dark Ages market, just like Fallout cornered the 1950s retrofuturist market. Fallout seems to have had a big influence on this product in general. Not enough in some ways, but I mean, they hired a fucking New Vegas guy right off the bat. The Peacekeeper's headquarters is just Rivet City, if Rivet City wasn't made up entirely of loading screens. That's enough about the visuals and style of the world, though. Let's get into the meat of the discussion. Gameplay-wise, this is a fairly standard open world for 2022. It shares a lot in common with modern Ubisoft design, which is to say it's very icon-based and built around a series of repeating activities, but it manages to execute on this formula in a way that, doesn't suck? There's just enough uniqueness here to keep the modern open world formula recognizable while also being more engaging than Far Cry 15 or Assassin's Creed 35. Sure, you climb towers in the same way we've all been climbing towers since 2012, but at least this game comes equipped with the necessary systems to make climbing some shit actually fun. There are generic bandit camps, because every open world game needs bandit camps, but there are also more creative ideas like campfires you can sit at for minutes on end to hear stories straight from the mouths of the city's populace. I love little shit like this. Slight tangent, but I once encountered a bug where I could sit down at a campfire that wasn't there, and it was the best thing that happened in the entire game. I loved being able to just sit and sink into the serene atmosphere of the city of my own accord. Honestly, I think players should be able to sit down like this whenever, not just at a campfire, either to simply chill out on command or to pass time, Skyrim style, without having to retreat to a specified sleeping bag so Aiden can have his requisite super seizure before gingerly laying his head down to bed. Oh, sleep tight, Aiden. I'm sure you'll get a great night's sleep. Another element of Villador that I adore and can't get from any other game are the building interiors. Look at these. Look at this. Look and see. You can go anywhere in this motherfucker. I've always longed for an open world set in a city where buildings aren't just blocked off boxes used to simulate a city and instead function as actual buildings you can go inside of. And Dying Light does that shit masterfully. I've never seen anyone do it better. Running from rooftops into a building and back out the other end is so fucking awesome. It'll never not be entertaining to explore the interiors of Dying Light while looting and killing everything found within. Keep it up, Techland. High five. These interiors are fucking awesome and elevate this world above many of its competitors, even if there's some noticeable repetition at play. But like, how could there not be with a city of this scale? If every interior was unique, this shit would never make it to shelves. Thank goodness it did, though, because scurrying through these interiors is especially compelling when you take into account another important element of Stay Human's world, and that is day and night. The day-night cycle was a key component of Dying Light 1, and it still is in 2, although it's been heavily adjusted this time around. I'm mixed on this. In general, nighttime is less scary and less intense this time around. There are no volatiles roaming the streets and roofs, the special infected count is pretty minimal, it's shockingly tame when compared to DL1's inky black and petrifying evenings. I completely understand the reasoning behind this change, although I'm not sure I really love the way it was executed on release. If you're watching this video 2 years from now, they might have patched that shit to hell and back, because people have bitched relentlessly about the nighttime changes, and Techland really does listen to their core audience, which is great. I absolutely anticipate some changes to nighttime in future patches. The reasoning behind this shift in nighttime intensity, though, it stems from the simple fact that very few players would go out during the night in Dying Light 1. Nighttime in Haran turns Dying Light into a completely different game. It goes from Dead Island to fucking Amnesia. You transform from a buff badass to a scared baby bitch who must run and hide from the slightest of sounds. The difference between these two modes of play really was night and day, and it caused a huge imbalance in gameplay. Players just straight up would not go out at night because they preferred the slightly more easygoing gameplay of the day. I am one of those people. Nighttime in the first game was scary as hell, but more importantly, it wasn't rewarding enough to endure. Sure, you got 2 times the upgrade points, but that's a meager pittance when set alongside the difficulty of surviving 5 minutes in Haran after the sun sets without getting fucking skinned alive. By design, nighttime and daytime were deeply imbalanced in DL1, so what Techland is trying to do, and succeeded in doing for the sequel, is making daytime and nighttime equally viable, making them much more similar in terms of the core experience, while continuing to vary up the available activities during both times of play. Daytime and nighttime are basically the same in DL2, it's just there are more zombies outside of interiors at night and more humans roaming around during the day. Certain activities as well, they favor certain TODs. I think this was a very smart move, because I found myself casually roaming around at night much more than I did in the previous game. I actually went outside, like for the other 50% of the game. It worked. My main critique of this whole system would be to make nighttime a little scarier than it is now, a little more intense. You don't gotta crank it all the fucking way back up to DL1 in terms of difficulty, but make the rooftops less of an absolute safe zone. Throw more special infected out there on higher difficulties. Bump down the brightness, stuff like that. I think a few small tweaks like that would go a long way to appeasing the fans of DL1's more unforgiving and horrifying nights without compromising the new, more balanced take on the franchise's day-night cycle. Now that we've broken down the core elements of Stay Human's world, let's get more specific and talk about the actual content found in Villador, the activities themselves. What do we got there? Well, we got side quests first and foremost, and these side quests are lame. Even after 70 hours, I'm still baffled by how every side quest is about, someone's marriage? Some examples, to name a few. You deliver mail to some gay lovers who are leaving their wives for each other. You save a geriatric relationship by collecting sardines. I cannot imagine the smell. You help 2 loving partners on the run with their kid. You meet a woman who's fallen for a renegade. You encounter 2 lovebirds fleeing from their disapproving families. A woman is hiding from her husband and having another man's baby. Maybe Lawan loves Aiden, but maybe she's holding a torch for another mysterious man. What is happening here? I kept picking up side quest after side quest, and every single one of them started with some shit like, go talk to my wife about the divorce. Johnny, I don't love you anymore. Aiden, please save my marriage in 3 sentences. Dying Light 2. Stay married.
Maybe you can help us. Help save our marriage.
I get it, man. We're all trying to ward off feelings of despair so we can stay human in this harsh world, and an essential aspect of humanity is love, but like 50% of this game's side content is dedicated to lovey-dovey bullpucky, and that unearned sappiness becomes fucking exhausting at the speed of sound. If I wanted to watch Dawson's Creek, I could just boot up Hulu.
She called Jen a stupid slut for what she did with Jacob.
And look, I understand that as a game dev, creating a product centered around a fictional deadly pandemic in the midst of a real-world deadly pandemic was probably a big fucking downer, and the shift to a more approachable tone between DL1 and DL2 probably has something to do with those working conditions. You don't want to stare at that shit on the clock and off, so why not brighten things up a bit, but you gotta vary up your stories. Not every side narrative needs to be a romantic drama. I do not come to Dying Light for that shit whatsoever. Every once in a while, it can be very cool to focus on the more subtle and sensitive side of humans in a high-stakes world like this, but these romance-lined side quests are so numerous that I just started laughing every time I encountered one. I could not unsee that pattern after the 5th time 2 flat fucking NPCs asked me to be their couples therapist. Okay, apart from the weird romance theming though, the side quests aren't altogether interesting. A few of them contain some heartfelt stories and some interest-speaking characters, but more often than not, they're short and forgettable. Just go here and talk to someone, go here and talk to someone else. Sometimes you get to make a decision at the end. It's all very standard. I'd say 10% of the side quests here are memorable, 50% are fine, and the remaining 40% are just bad. The quests that fall into the bad percentile are either the ones where the writing really falters, like the Peacekeeper quest I mentioned earlier, or the ones that you think are going to be side quests, but actually turn out to be challenges skinned up like side quests. There are copious amounts of these fake out side quests. You'll talk to someone who's mildly stimulating, like a brewer or an ex-skydiver, and then at the end of the convo, they'll direct you to an interaction, and oh fuck, it's another one of these goddamn challenges! Thankfully, if the side quests don't do it for you, like they didn't do it for me, there are still plenty of other activities to engage with. We've already mentioned the GRE anomalies and the windmills, but there's way more than that, stuff like the metro stations. These subway areas offer a 2-part challenge of either a bandit camp or a zombie nest, followed by a parkour puzzle where you activate generators in MCS you're looking at substations, and I really enjoy these little slices of curated gameplay. I dug the fact that completing them offered a new point of fast travel too. That was incredibly rewarding and worthwhile. Quietly gating off the game's fast travel mechanic behind these activities results in the player having to actually explore the world until these points are unlocked, as opposed to relying on fast travel from the get-go to help skip past the open world part of the open world game. Not saying I'm against generous fast travel mechanics in the vein of Ghost of Tsushima, but Dying Light isn't the venue for that kind of system. I mean, the first game didn't have fast travel at all, so I feel like this is a great compromise. Another new activity found in Villador are the GRE buildings, dangerous quarantined locations that you can pillage for special upgrade materials. Wonderful idea and concept, very repetitive in execution. All you have to do here is enter the building, stay crouched while you loot a few floors, make your way out. Once you've completed one of these, you've completed them all. And it sucks because at first blush, they're some of the most tense pieces of horror-based content in the game. That tension and fear dissipates when you realize that all of these buildings are nearly identical in their layout and gameplay flow. I want surprises in these GRE buildings, differing architectural layouts and specific enemies to encounter, like the incredible quarantine zones of the first game. Put a Banshee in one of these, put an ambush viral around a corner on some Dark Souls shit. Give me something other than these same labs and these same Dr. Zombie motherfuckers. If these GRE buildings were more varied in their construction, and if they more significantly highlighted the vastly underrepresented horror side of DL2, I think they could be some of my favorite parts of the game. As it stands, I do still enjoy them, even if they're blatantly repetitive. It is also funny that if you come back to instances of these buildings where you're over-leveled, it just turns into a festival of one-shots. All you do is bonk, 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 bonk. Not scary at all, but enjoyable in a different way. Speaking of specialized interiors, let's wind it back to something I mentioned earlier, the Peacekeepers' headquarters. Rivet City? What's it called? The Missy is the base of operations for the Peacekeepers faction, and one of the largest faction interiors that Stay Human has to offer. Techland took the safe zones of the original game and elaborated on them, keeping many of them as these small little respites from the outside world, but also turning others into full-on, bustling locations packed with NPCs just going about their lives. Even though, again, these locations completely undercut the isolated zombie apocalypse vibes I loved so much about the first game, these areas are alright, oddly cozy. I would prefer less of them littering the land as to make the world feel a bit more treacherous, but the real important thing I want to mention is that we as players 100% need more interesting things to do at these locations. Give me some mini games I can engage with. Let me play that weird knife hand thing from Red Dead with some peacekeepers. Let me buy a drink at the fisheye or on the Missy so I can sip it at my leisure as I walk around. Elaborate on the immersive seed of the campfires and give me clever, offbeat slices of gameplay here that make me feel like I'm actually living in Villador. The Yakuza series thrives on minigames. Kamurocho feels so real because you can go into so many places and engage with so many strange, disparate activities. Look at them for inspiration. I'm just asking for any reason to visit these places other than buying weapons and armor or upgrading weapons and armor. Consistently, there are quest givers located inside these faction interiors, but as I mentioned, the quests aren't much to behold, so please give me a fire to sit down at, so to speak. Anything, man, anything to turn these places into genuinely lively venues that don't just feel like a bunch of hollow NPCs repeating stale animations. That's what these places come down to after 10 or 20 hours, even if they look great on the visual side of things. The last activities I want to momentarily touch on are the water towers and electricity stations, and how they affect the world around the player. The towers are miniature parkour puzzles that lean on efficient use of the stamina bar, and the electricity stations are differing parkour puzzles that revolve around trailing a rope through complex arenas to get things up and running again. I could take or leave the water tower gameplay, it's just more climbing, but I really liked the electricity station rope puzzles. That was a very clever use of the parkour system. Both of these activities end with the player being able to assign these buildings to either the survivors or the peacekeepers, a decision that you'd think would come with some sort of impact on the story or outlook of either of the factions, but it never really does any of that. All these activities actually result in is one new feature being added to the various districts held by the rewarded faction. A neat idea and concept, and you can feel somewhat of a difference in the environment after you've completed enough of these activities, but I honestly thought there would be more to it. There's lots of stuff to do in this world, which is good. What is not good is that, as implied over the course of this segment, a lot of that stuff is derivative and repetitive. And there's no problem with some degree of repetition in an open world game. It is essentially unavoidable, but DL2 has fallen prey to the Ubisoft school of open world design where everything is icon based and checklist driven. And that's just not very exciting in today's market. Dying Light 1's world was simpler, but it felt less generic and homogenized than what DL2's world has become. Probably the single biggest disappointment to me with this game is that Techland has taken quite a few painful cues from Far Cry and Assassin's Creed with its copy-paste content and overall game design. It's not bad, it is better than Assassin's Creed or Watch Dogs or Far Cry, but it's sad that I even have to bring those games up as equivalencies when talking about Dying Light 2, because I fucking hate those boring-ass games. Techland didn't completely drop the ball with their open world. There are truly unique elements like the day-night cycle and their dense building interiors, but I got my fingers crossed that the studio gets more creative and strives to innovate and set themselves apart from the competition moving forward, as opposed to trailing behind it. This game and this world and this franchise has massive potential, and I can see it. It's right there. It's just not fleshed out enough, and in its current condition, the open world experience is a little too standard. And this isn't something that can be fixed with patches or DLC, I don't think. It's more just something to consider when beginning to develop the third game. Take what worked about the first game's open world, take what worked about the second game's open world, trim the fat, get more experimental with the available activities and experiences, and ditch the overwhelming Ubisoft influence, and it's gonna be a fucking winner. That's a sure thing. Right now, though, Stay Human provides a solid foundation with a few interesting activities to build upon, and that's awesome. But like the story, there's a lot of room for improvement with the open world. I eagerly await those improvements.
Zombies.
Zombies! Zombies! Where the fuck are the zombies? You may have noticed I didn't mention zombies at all during the story conversation, and that is because these motherfuckers barely factor into the story. Dying Light 2 seems much less concerned about the zombies than its forebear, but I'm still gonna dedicate a whole segment to them because this is a goddamn zombie game, god damn it! It was confusing too, because the game makes a big deal showcasing the volatiles twice in as many hours when you start the game, and then they just never show up again. Motherfucker, this thing spoke to me last time we were here. Are we just not gonna talk about that? Yeah, I get it. The mother's sentience was the result of some specific chemicals near Haran, blah, blah, blah. But there are also military chemicals dropped on Villador at some point. I'm just saying, there was some way to work that shit back into the story. That's all, I'm just saying. Still holding out hope that a faction of sentient volatiles will make an appearance in upcoming DLC, because that is much too compelling a plot point to leave dormant for long. Now that we've broached the topic of the volatiles, I don't really like them this time around. And not just because you don't talk to them. You made me look like a fucking idiot again, Techland! It's their lack of a presence and their new design, mostly. I don't like the ridged, armored look and the monochromatic gray color scheme. They're just not as immediately stand out as they used to be. Oftentimes they can blend in with the virals, who also look like just a chunk of old highway. I miss the bloody mouths, the protruding bones sticking out of their fleshy exteriors. Nah, these macho-looking motherfuckers ain't cutting the mustard. Hashtag not my volatile. Get that shit out of here. But yeah, even if I did prefer the new design, I'd still be upset by their utter lack of a presence in both the story and gameplay. They show up during level 3 and 4 chases, and they're occasionally found in interiors during the day, which basically means you never see them, and I found that really disappointing, as these creatures are basically the face of the series for me. Man, zombies in general seem to be sort of an afterthought this time around. It's fucking weird. Like, I wouldn't doubt if the raw amount of content actually involving zombies was similar to the first game. It's just that this time around, that zombie content is outweighed by so much more content that is not zombie-based, and a large chunk of that content is either hit or miss or forgettable, so it makes the game feel padded and less packed with that undead goodness that I signed up for. It's almost like some important decision makers at Techland had little interest in making another zombie game. It makes sense in some ways. In order to build up a more expansive world, you need to focus on characters that can speak as opposed to mindless zombies, but that's why I think the zombies should evolve in the coming entries of the series and start playing a role similar to the super mutants in Fallout, a sometimes antagonistic, sometimes not group of loosely and disparately evolved beings. One more time for the people in the back, focus more on the zombies! Why is that even funny? It's not even funny when I say it like that. Apart from the volatiles, though, we also have several new monsters, courtesy of these, what's it called? The THC virus? The Revenants are another new viral addition. They're built to serve as mini-bosses that you can find at specific locations at night, but I don't feel they're really worthy of the mini-boss mantle, as they are typically bitch-made punks. They just jump around and fart like Stubbs and die, and whip their asses in 10 seconds every time. Maybe because I was over-leveled, but still. Their movesets are limited to a few simple attacks and hopping around an arena. When the Revenants were subtly revealed in a trailer for the game, I was kinda hoping they'd serve as a type of flying zombie built to track you between the massive gaps of the heightened rooftops of Central Loop, but they're restricted to pretty boring fights that all feel the same, regardless of their mildly varied, unique locations. Along with the Revenants, we have the Banshees and the Chargers, the latter two of which I encountered maybe twice in my entire playthrough. Please put more of these little guys out in the open world, Techland. You made them, they look fucking crazy cool. Why aren't you using them? In terms of the visuals of all these spooky bad boys and girls, the creature designs this time around are much more fantastical for the most part, a choice that goes hand in hand with the more fantastical design of Villador as compared to Haran. Pulsing neon veins and bright VFX typically highlight special infected from a distance during nighttime, and while this absolutely makes sense from a gameplay perspective, you gotta make them more visible in dense crowds, it also lessens the scare factor significantly because you can see threats coming from a mile away and very easily avoid them by hanging out on rooftops, which are almost completely safe. Plus, these glowing elements are an aesthetic choice that I'm just not a huge fan of. It makes the zombies come across as much less grounded, and while that fits with the fantasy style, modern Dark Ages theming of the game's world, I don't know, I'm just not really feeling it. The undead in Dying Light 1 were admittedly more generic to varying degrees, but they were also more horror-based in their design, more bloody and frightening, and that's my personal preference. Another core component that's changed along with the aesthetics of the zombies are their physics and behaviors. The new ragdoll's got its own charms, but the behaviors of the biters in particular seem to be sorta gutted. And that's a fucking tragedy because the way the biters just fucked around and feebly climbed over shit and tripped over each other and fell off rooftops in DL1 really highlighted those enemies as something special. Sometimes they just stand there and fucking look at you, and this kind of unpredictable behavior really kept you on your toes and really made you laugh. Maybe there's some of that character still left in Stay Human, but I haven't really seen it, except for this shit. Can I do something for you, my man? The last bit of zombie content I want to brush over real quick are the chases, which just seem kind of broken? I'm sure Techland realizes this already to some extent, but these chases are so easy to escape that encountering zombies at night is almost a non-issue. They cannot keep up with you at all, so a chase rarely naturally evolves beyond level 1. Once you've unlocked 5 parkour upgrades, the AI is fucked, and once you unlock the paraglider a third of the way through, the game, it just collapses on itself. It has no idea what to do. I appreciate that beginning a chase no longer means that volatiles will instantly reach up inside you and prolapse your entire body, but now we have the opposite issue. Zombies can't even climb a fucking ledge. And that's really all I got to say about zombies, TBH. One last thing before we close this big bitch out. You know I had to do it to him. It's time to talk about this game's HUD, or heads-up display, or shit on the screen. I honestly would not doubt that Techland is deeply tired of hearing about their HUD, so I'll keep this shit short. I'm just gonna clear through a bunch of bullet points as quickly as possible. It's ugly, too many colors, hard to look at, no cohesion. Stylistically, it's over-exaggerated and almost cartoony. It doesn't feel suited to the game it's attached to. It brings too much attention to itself just by looking the way it does. There are too many things on screen. I appreciate that a patch has already allowed for a more dynamic HUD, but still, I'd love to have more granular control over disabling specific elements like the chase meter, blinking indicators, or skill counters. The HUD gamifies certain experiences to the point where they lose all sense of immersion and spontaneity. Zombies with health bars are weird. Having a GTA chase meter is distracting. This kind of stuff unnecessarily gamifies certain elements of the Dying Light experience and just throws cold water over everything. It makes it feel strangely clinical.
It's a tight fit in here.
The menus are so cluttered that there's a lag when switching between them. Still, months after release, and that is such a fucking feel bad, it's unbelievable. The whole thing has now been Ubisoftified, which makes it more generic and grating in its presentation to me personally. I hate cursors. I hate these motherfuckers. I do not know who convinced game designers at large otherwise, but this is not an improvement over just pressing buttons to move around menus, especially on a controller. It feels like balls. The map is this hard to parse 3D model that looks so muddled compared to the clean lines and monochromatic palette of the first game's map, and menus in general. I miss this shit. I miss the elegant simplicity of DL1's HUD so bad, man. Fucking hell! At the bottom of this note, I have written, I'm about to throw it all away for this clown booty. Oh my god, I'm about to go to clown girl honk heaven for this bitch. That's a Facebook group. That was suggested to me one time. That's where that joke came from. I don't beat off the clowns. But now everybody's gonna think that I beat off the clowns. So why not just embrace it? I think I just saw one picture of a girl dressed up like a clown with a big fat ass.
In conclusion.
Whew. Boy, that took a little while, didn't it? Dying Light 2 is not a great game, but it is a good game. A day or two before release, when the review embargo lifted, I saw that IGN gave it a 7, and I was kind of shocked. But now, having sunk nearly 100 hours total into this game, a 7 seems appropriate. Dying Light 2 gets a lot right. The traversal system is the best in the business, the combat is satisfying as hell at a base level, and the world is colorful and inviting. It's just that when you really start looking at this game, it's kind of forgettable. As a product on its own, it presents something relatively enjoyable, somewhat distracting, but as a sequel to Dying Light, it disappoints in more ways than it doesn't. For some reason, or more appropriately for many reasons that I just took an hour to explain, the first game sticks out as the superior experience to me. The parkour was not as incredible as it is now, but I just dug the solitude of Haran, the militaristic and horror-centric vibes of Haran, way more than I dig the poppy, vibrant, and outlandish vibes of Villador. I also think I actually enjoyed the story of DL1 more than DL2, which is fucking insane to me because I didn't enjoy that original story much to begin with, but DL2 just dropped the ball so hard there that it makes Kyle Crane and his almost charmingly cliche Resident Evil-esque adventure look much better in retrospect, even though comparing the two is almost unfair because they're so damn different. Stay Human almost seems less like a sequel to Dying Light and more like another entirely new IP in the vein of the move from Dead Island to Dying Light 1. And if I had to choose a favorite amongst the three of Techland's zombie opuses, I'd choose the original Dying Light any day of the week. That's still the king of zombie games. And I know the Dying Light 1 we look at today is built up after 7 years of laborious support on the part of Techland, but dismissing all of that extra stuff, I still enjoyed the Day 1 Dying Light package more than I enjoyed the Day 1 Dying Light 2 package. And that's it. It's finally done. After 4 years of waiting, I have played, completed, and reviewed Dying Light 2. Goddamn. I don't really know how to end this.